Our guest today is the director of the Illinois Department of Family Services. He was appointed by Governor Rauner 2 months ago. Prior to his appointment by Governor Rauner, he worked for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Our guest today was a practicing attorney before his work with Child and Family Welfare. He also served as a member of the Florida House of Representatives for 8 years. Our guest today earned his bachelor's degree and his law degree from Florida State University. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the City Club of Chicago, George Sheldon. George? Thank you very much.
Jay, thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation to the City Club. I've heard a lot about this organization and what you give back to the people of Chicago. I'm pleased to be invited here. Actually, as director of the Department of Children and Family Services, I'm pleased to be invited anywhere. You know, it's good to be in Chicago, but I will tell you on Super Bowl Sunday, I left Fort Lauderdale where it was 82 degrees, landed here to meet with your governor, and it was in single digits. There were 18 inches of snow, 45-mile-an-hour winds, and my reactions was, what the hell am I doing in Chicago? But you know, that day when I met with Governor Rauner, I really saw some of his vision for this agency and some of what he articulated as the opportunities in the department. But as I began to look at this agency, I saw several things. One, the department has had 7 directors over the last 4 years, and that wasn't particularly reassuring to me. I've now been here almost 2.5 months, and I've out-survived 2 of those former directors. But despite the weather, I also found that meeting with your governor, I found a great feeling of duty and really obligation and opportunity. And I'd like to really tell you about what I see as that opportunity and about the duty that we all have as society to the most vulnerable people in our society, the children who come from troubled homes, who don't have the advantages that many of us had. Children really may only be 25% of our population, but in reality, they're 100% of our future. That's something that we fundamentally have to remember every day. Personally, I was the youngest of 6 children, and the first in my family to go to college. My mother worked as a school lunchroom worker till she was 70, so I could finish college. She taught me the importance of family. She taught me the importance of education. She also taught me the importance of sacrifice for those you care about. And I think back to those days, and I owe so much to my mom, and I think most of you here can really focus on that same kind of feeling. But many of the children that come into the scope of the Department of Children and Families don't come from those kind of homes. They don't have those kinds of supportive moms and dads. And in too many cases, those parents suffer from mental illness and substance abuse. They may come from homes where the parents aren't very well educated, where they can't provide the rich nourishment that children need for their own educational advancement. Too many of those families are lower income, and they suffer the obstacles and challenges that go along with that kind of economic position in society. But the more I learn about child abuse, the more I'm convinced it goes back fundamentally to mental health, substance abuse, and economic stress. When I became secretary of the department in Florida, I remember the secretary of our Department of Corrections, our prison system, because I had mental health and substance abuse in the agency. I remember him saying, George, if you can solve the problems of mental health and substance abuse, I can close 80% of my jail beds tomorrow. And I think we need to recognize that a lot of these kids are coming from homes that actually love them as well, but they're in the grips of mental health or substance abuse, or they're in the grips of some kind of economic pressure that limits their ability to care for their children. The factors that these kids are experiencing doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have loving parents. Now, I know that one of our first jobs in this agency is to keep children safe. But to be honest with you, we know how to keep kids safe. All you have to do is remove them from their home, lock them in a room, give them a bed and 3 hot meals, they're safe. But we have even a greater responsibility than that. And that is to make sure that these young children become productive members of society, that we really think about child well-being. Because if we so shelter children and they age out of the system at 18 or 21 or whatever that number is, without social skills, without an education, without the ability of becoming a productive member of society, then we really haven't done anything for those children. You've seen the same studies that I've seen in terms of children in foster care who find a direct pipeline into homelessness in the criminal justice system. They just did a study of the Atlanta jail system. And what they found was the majority of inmates incarcerated in Atlanta had some involvement with the child welfare system. Think about that. Think about the economic losses of that. Fundamentally, as a department and fundamentally as a society, we have to give these children one thing that they've never been given, and that is hope. One of the most fundamental and most precious elements in our own development. We talk a lot today about incentives, but hope really is the greatest incentive of all. We work hard because we have the hope of succeeding. We take care of ourselves because we have a hope of living longer and better. We raise our children well because we have a hope of them living a better life than we did. Just 15 years ago, Illinois was seen around the country as one of the leading models in child welfare. So what's happened over those last 15 years? Where did Illinois get to where it is? I don't need to tell you. You see the headlines, the beleaguered department, the troubled department. You see our outcomes. I think, first of all, we have to be willing as an agency and as a society to admit when we make a mistake and agree to learn from that mistake. We have to be willing, when something bad happens, to be transparent, open up the records so that the whole world can see, and agree that we will learn from those mistakes. We have to own up to it. Because no matter how good we get as a state and as a department, no matter how good we get, we can't save every dysfunctional family. That's got to be our goal. But we can't predict human activity. Illinois right now has the longest length of stay in foster care of any state in the country. Think about that. The data shows length of stay of over 33 months. We had gotten it down to 7 months in Florida. It's inched back up to about 11 months. It is not normal for children to grow up in care. And on its best day, government is not a good parent. So our goal has to be, as quickly as possible, to reunify families or to move that child to a permanent setting, be it an adoptive setting, as Justice Burke has done, or be it a permanent guardianship. Illinois also has an over-reliance on deep-end residential care, as you read in the recent news articles about harsh punishment or harsh treatment. Deep-end residential treatment was not designed as a placement. It was not designed as a permanent place for children to go. It was designed as a place to stabilize children, design the kind of wraparound services for those children, and move them down into a more appropriate setting. It is not normal to change your parents every 8 hours, as we do in shift group care. And that's particularly true for children under the age of 6. Because that's, and you've seen the research, that's when children learn the ability to attach. That's when they develop who they are. So how do we deal with this? These problems have been building up over years. So they're not going to be turned around overnight. I am not a miracle worker. But the first thing, if we're going to really change this system, is admit that what's happened in the past was a mistake and figure out how to build for a better future. The second issue is leadership. Invest in turning this agency around. And I believe that Governor Rauner wants to solve problems. He's interested in what works, not what sells. And he and I may have come from different parties, but I believe we share a determination to once again make Illinois a state that is leading the way in child welfare. You know, we have all this discussion about partisanship and the left and the right, when in reality, government is nothing more, 90% of government is nothing more than making the trains run on time. So if we can agree on that piece, we can continue to disagree on those things on the sides. Third, we've got to revitalize our staff. And I see in this agency an amazing amount of talent, of experience, of institutional knowledge. But due to constant starts and stops, 7 directors in 4 years, many of them think that their concerns will no longer be heard by upper management. Many feel that they've been left to fend for themselves. So I've been meeting with staff, trying to reassure them. And what I basically said to frontline staff is we are going to attempt as best we can to give you the tools to do your job and to stand behind you. If you follow the rules, if you make the visits, you follow the protocols, and make a judgment call and the case goes bad, this agency will stand behind you. Too many times in child welfare systems, what we do is we fire the lowest person on the totem pole and we call that reform. That is not reform. Now, if somebody falsifies a record or lies or doesn't make a visit, that's a different story. So what I've tried to say to frontline staff is, first of all, figure out the right thing to do for this child. Then figure out how the rules apply. And I said on rules, don't violate a rule. But if the application of the rule has a stupid result, bump it up to somebody who can make a decision. We had a case that I dealt with in Florida where a child was abused, severely abused before the age of 10 days old. Severe brain damage, severe physical damage, and was placed in an appropriate setting with a retired nurse who had 4 children who had finished college and were out of the home. That child became her cause. Fast forward, the child now is 10 years old, a remarkable placement, still severely damaged, nonverbal. But this foster parent loved that child and wanted to adopt, applied to adopt. Our agency said, denied the adoption because it was a townhouse and they didn't have a chair lift to lift the child up to the bedrooms. That might have been fine when the child was 10 days old, but not when the child is 10 years old. Denied the adoption. The Medicaid agency denied the renovations because they said we can't make renovations to this home so long as this child's in foster care. We can only do it if the child's adopted. That's how bureaucracy works. So what we've got to do is empower people to say, all right, let's get this up to somebody to make a decision. So I talked to the director of Medicaid. We agreed to do it simultaneously. We didn't violate a rule, but we got that child placed where that child should have been. That's the way we've got to begin to think about how to move forward. We need to promise ourselves and each other that these young people who depend on us, that we will never let this be just a job. We've got to see that every child in our system is treated the way we would want our own child to be treated. We must promise ourselves that we will not let the bureaucracy and the rules stand in our way from doing the best thing for children. Fourth, we have to talk to kids. Kind of a novel idea. But we designed a whole child welfare system in this country, and we never talked to kids. I will tell you, they know more about this system than I will ever know. When I became secretary in Florida, I was asked to meet with about 12 young people who aged out of care. And I thought, as a new director, I'd go by for about 20 minutes, make a few comments, go out and have dinner. 2.5 hours later, I learned more about the child welfare system in Florida than I've learned from all the professionals. And I'm not taking anything away from professionals. It is important to have children at the table because pretty soon it will be their table. I went to speak to some foster parents one day. It was about 200 foster parents to give a speech. And I was accosted by 3 foster parents before I stood up to speak, complaining about the department's dangerous activities are. I said, we don't have one. They said, yes, you do. I said, no, we don't. We did. We had this woman in the agency who would approve any activity that a foster child could participate in. Well, Johnny can participate in Boy Scouts, but he can't participate in archery. There is risk in every decision we make. You may not want your foster child skydiving, but you probably don't want your own child skydiving. We need to be, if we're going to ask people to be foster parents, we need to empower them to be parents. If Susie wants to do a sleepover down the street, we don't need to do a background check and a home study. First of all, Susie doesn't want to admit she's in foster care. We need to empower foster parents to do that which a normal parent would do, is get to know the other parents. Get down and look at the home. If we don't make the system normal for kids, how do we expect them to be productive members of society when they're no longer in our care? We even use all these non-normal words. Children move from home to home to home. Foster children move from placement to placement to placement. Children live at home with their biological parents. Wards live in the state system. Why do we even use those words? And we've gone so far in the department as to actually call parents resources. Why don't we call them parents? Maybe a biological parent, maybe foster parent. I met with some foster kids after that meeting with foster parents, and these foster kids, I said, if you were me and you could change anything you wanted to change in the system, what would it be? And they stood up and gave a lot of different suggestions, and this one 12-year-old little boy finally stood up and he said, stop calling us foster kids. We're just kids. And I think that's what we have to remember as we move forward. Reaching children from the youngest age through adolescence is truly the greatest hope, I believe, of improving our society, of reducing the cost of incarceration, of reducing the cost of entitlement spending, of increasing productivity, of the creation of stronger families. Some 27 years ago, the Chicago police found a 4-year-old young child foraging for food through a dumpster. The child was brought into care. The child was one of 4 children to parents suffering from mental illness and abuse. They had been subjected to physical and sexual abuse, poor nutrition, trauma that they will have to deal with for years to come. And the first foster family he knew basically pointed out to them when he came into care, he knew the name of virtually every brand of beer. Not something a 4-year-old ought to be learning. 4-year-old ought to be learning his alphabet. But back to that 4-year-old, placed initially with relatives before being placed in a home with foster parents for 10 years. 2 caregivers that he would later refer to as his parents. 7 different homes, homelessness, psychiatric hospital. Now, 27 years later, let me introduce to you that 4-year-old young child, Jeremy Harvey. And you might say, why point that out? Jeremy is proud of everything that he's accomplished. And he's learning how to make the experiences that he had in this foster care system benefit other children. See, Jeremy is now college graduate, newly married, passionate about being a paralegal at the Office of the Public Guardian, proud of what he's accomplished, and wanting to put that back to work. See, he attended the Northern Illinois University and got his BA in history and sociology on a DCF scholarship. He went on to Loyola for postgraduate work. Now, what made Jeremy a success is what he articulated in his own words was a best friend whose family offered him a place to stay, when otherwise he might have been homeless. And now he's a zealous advocate for children. He's worked with families, with kids to find them housing when otherwise they would be homeless. Are these kids worth saving? I think we have to ask ourselves that as a society. And I would attest that Jeremy is an example of why we do what we do. Because every single child's success is one step forward to improving the society that we live in and that we want to call our place to live. Frederick Douglass, I think, put it best when he said that it is easier to build strong children than it is to repair a broken man. That's why we do what we do. That's the mission of this agency, and that's got to be your mission and every one of us in this community, is to build strong children. Thank you very much, and thank you for the chance to be here.
Good question. Yeah, we're happy to. Now, there's the big sandbag.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I've been told I now have to open myself up to questions. And Justice Burke asked me last night if I had any softball questions, but I'll take soft or hard.
Here we go. They're all written. We don't trust these people. I trust them. You're a rookie. If you have your questions, raise your hand. Our people will be running through here. Right off the back, no sense in giving you a little ease in. Mr. Luminani, Attorney, Housing Authority of Cook County. Right in front. How can Illinois reconcile, let me make this easier. How can you, as the head of your agency, reconcile its commitments to troubled youth and the proposed austerity budget?
I'm going to let Jeremy answer that. Let me say this, and I've had these conversations with Governor Rauner. Illinois is in bad fiscal shape. When I was Secretary of the Department in Florida, we had to take $200 million in budget cuts. Now, I had a larger agency. It was a $3 billion agency rather than what I have here. I committed to do that without cuts in services or frontline staff. Now, it cut into our oversight capability, which I said we can do that for a year or two. I empathize with your governor, and I say that as a member of a different party. There are no good choices. It's almost a Sophie's choice. What do we cut off? So my job, as I see it, is to say, all right, are there alternatives to this? Illinois has done a terrible job maximizing federal money. And I would also point out, for those who say it's federal money, we shouldn't be taking it. It's not federal money, it's your money. We ought to be taking it. We have 2,400 young people in the category that you're talking about, 18 to 21. 2,400 young people. We are drawing down federal money on 35% of those young people. Other states are at 90%. Now, the difference between 35% and 90% is about $50 or $60 million. Now, the question we have is why is that happening? It's really two reasons. One, the federal program was designed to incentivize children to stay in school or stay in a work environment, or they're unable to work because of a disability, and therefore you can still draw down federal money. My view is we need, if this, and this is a long process in the budget, having served in the legislature between this point and the final point. But my view is we need to redesign this program if it survives. And we need to be incentivizing kids to do that which is in their best interest to do. It is not much, this may sound cruel, but it is not much different than a parent saying to Johnny, you're now 19 years old, you either need to get a job or you need to stay in school or you need to find another place to live. If a child ages out at 18 without an education or without a job skill, or they age out at 21 without an education or without a job skill, we haven't done anything for that child. I think we need to get to a system where we're 90%. We're drawing down federal reimbursement for 90%. Secondly, there's a mechanical issue. A child's eligibility when they turn, a child's eligibility for 4E money coming out of the federal government is based on the family income of the family they come out of. But when that child turns 18, they're now a family of one. So the question I have, are we automatically redetermining eligibility? So I think there are some tweaks in this system where we can be better maximizing federal dollars. And what I want to do is have some ideas as to how to get there.
You answered like 3 of the other questions, so I'll try. Kind of a trend.
Okay,
Well, oh, George, you're not off the hook yet, but you're wiggling. He's from Florida. You get the, they don't get it. Faster crowd. Okay, this is from Rena Burns, 2 people, and Peter Lane. Okay, I guess they didn't want to take sole ownership. What impact does the Illinois Human Services Framework have on your department?
You're talking about the IT?
I would assume from IBM, is that the IT?
Is this the data warehousing piece that you're? Yeah. I think it's an important. The other thing, and I hate to be dumping on Illinois, but your technology system is archaic.
Don't hold back, George.
And we have 7 IT systems in my department alone that don't talk to each other. The better we share information about those young people who are being serviced by various agencies, the better we can deliver services to those young people. So I think a total redesign of information technology is critical to human services moving forward. Not just the children we serve, but that's also true with people with mental health issues or economic distress issues or substance abuse issues. That's another area where there's a waiver from the federal government called the A87 waiver, which offers to states, it's part of the Affordable Care Act, sorry about that, part of the Affordable Care Act, which offers to human service agencies who are willing to tie into the Medicaid system 90-10 money. 90-10 money is pretty good federal money. It means we put up 10%, they put up 90% for redesigning the technology system. So I'm just, and Illinois has a new state CIO, which I have had some conversations with moving forward. So I am very committed to that. The one thing that I told Governor Rauner when I interviewed with him the first time was the 2 things that you've got to be prepared to invest in Illinois is technology and training. It's the two of the very things that usually are cut first, and it's 2 things that are critical, particularly in tight budget years. The more we can do with technology, and I'll give you an example. The city of Miami did a pilot where they used VITA money, voluntary income tax assistance money, and had law students at all of their community centers who were in the tax program who were doing free income tax preparation for people in the community. Client would come in, they get their income taxes done for free, which is pretty good. And in a lot of cases, they would make a finding, which that person had never known before, that they were eligible for the earned income tax credit. And then, based on that income, the technology systems were set up so they automatically determined what other services within government they were eligible for and automatically signed them up for those services. So you might be able to double somebody's income. And the purpose of that is not to get them addicted to an ongoing entitlement. The purpose of that is to get their lives stabilized so that they can live productively. That means childcare for folks who want to work. That means nutrition. That means education for their kids. So that's the why I think that really redesigning the way we do business and from an IT side is important.
Okay. Janice Kiff, where are you, Janice? Okay. A lot of budgetary issues here.
How did I know?
We don't want to hide anything. I have to read this. By the way, excellent printing. We hear you are terribly understaffed and children get lost in the system. That's a how do you do right off the bat, right here. Will the new governor up your budget to increase your staff to take care of all the children? That's 25 words or less you can have.
No.
Okay.
But let me do. We've got to be smarter within the agency as well. And let me. I talked in my prepared comments about deep end residential placement. We're spending $10,000 a month. That's $120,000 a year for deep end residential care. You go to Harvard for $120,000. And it's not good for kids. Kids should not be languishing in that kind of setting. We can provide foster care with intensive wraparound services for 1/3 of that or 50% of that. So we've got to also act smarter. Now, obviously, any agency head is going to say, I can do a better job with more money. But what we've got to do is figure out how do we operate within the money that we're allocated. And part of that is reallocating more services. I believe one of the advantages, and I hate to mention Florida, I had some advantages in Florida I don't have here. Florida had a waiver from the federal government for 4E funding. The way the federal government reimburses states is states get X amount of money for every child in care. Under the waiver, the state in effect gets a block grant and agrees to operate within that block grant. But the advantages of that is under the traditional family child financing scheme, the child has to be in foster care. And you can't spend any of that money to deal with the problem in the home, either to return that child to the home or not to bring that child into care in the first place. And when you look at the fact that 75% of the children that we bring into care are there because of neglect, not because of abuse, what can we do in that home? First of all, it's cheaper, it's better for kids. So we actually had in a 4-year period a 37% of reduction of children out of home care, and the federal government didn't take that money back. They allowed us to use that to deal with the mental health and substance abuse issues in the home. So we cut in half the length of time the child is in care, which is better for the child, number one, cost effective, number two, and you're reunifying family. The other thing that we also have to come to the conclusion that some children just lost the parent lottery. There's some parents who shouldn't be parents to start with. And it behooves us, and it is in the best interest of children, to give parents a chance to work with them to try to deal with the issues at home. But at some point in time, you've got to say, this person shouldn't be a parent, and we've got to move that child to a permanent adoptive setting or a permanent guardianship setting. And I don't accept what too many people in child welfare say is that certain kids are unadoptable. That is a failure on the part of the system. So I think there are ways, and before I actually go to the legislature or the governor and ask for additional resources, I've got to prove that this agency is competent to do the job with the money that it does have.
I apologize to all the people who wrote about questions about the money factor, and I think we've covered that. Last question from, is that Mike or Fagan? Mike? Doesn't? Mark? Unlike the previous one, you could use a little hammering. This is a very good question to close, George. Where do you see DCFS services for young adults in 2 years from now? Can I add on to your question? And do you see yourself still heading the agency?
Well, they gave me 25 business cards when I got here, and I'm down to the last two. 6 months from now, I'm hoping that we can get some incremental movement. I think we can get some early wins in that, because I think we're going to have to do that to restore public confidence. I think transparency will also help to restore public confidence. The press, you can't expect the press to get it right in a vacuum. They're going to go with what information they have. And so we in Florida began being very transparent when something bad happened. And we were the beleaguered department, the troubled department. 6 months later, I picked up the paper and it referred to the once troubled department. That was a huge victory, but that was about transparency. 2 years from now, it is my hope and vision that we really redesign our system of care, that we really design a system that pushes decision-making to the lowest appropriate level, because our employees on the front lines understand alternative placements better than we do sitting in Chicago. And decisions right now are made in Chicago rather than on the front line. I want to see a system that moves kids to the most appropriate community setting as opposed to the kind of deep end placement. And that's not to say deep end placement on some occasions may not be an appropriate setting, but it is not a long-term placement. So if we can redesign our system of care, and we brought in 4 experts as part of the BH consent decree, I think who bring a lot of talent, and I met with them this morning. I think that 2 years from now, or what I hope is that 2 years from now, you all are going to be much prouder of the Department of Children and Family Services than you've been over the past several years. Thank you all very much.
Round of applause. We got party to do.